Okay.
All right.
Hi.
And then you're
One more time.
you're listening to
Keyboard and Quill.
From StarTree, creators of the Real-Time Analytics Summit.
And
podcast.
I'm Tim Berglund.
I'm Rachel Pedreschi.
This is Keyboard and Quill. In this episode, we're going to look into some seemingly obscure product development trends at LinkedIn around 2010 and how they've radically altered the data landscape we live in today.
So, Tim, we've been here for 12 episodes. And you know what? I really feel that we've told some really good stories.
I think so too. We've heard some great stories from some of our guests.
For sure.
Yeah. And if you've been with us for these 12 episodes, we're glad that you have.
Thank you so much for staying with us.
The way we look at this history is not like there's this chronological series of events one after another that inexorably leads to some conclusion, but we kind of look at where we are. We try to look at what are these threads through time, these different things that come together to make this idea, this thing we do called real-time analytics possible.
And we've pulled on some pretty random threads, or seemingly random threads.
Like, where do we even start?
Well, we've started with that life got faster, which we made a pretty good case. It
Yeah.
took 45,000 years to get from cave paintings to where we are today.
Yeah, we talked a lot about writing and language and
The steam engine.
yeah, industrialization as a big part of that, kind of relentlessly accelerating pace of life. That seems to be just a large-scale trend.
And as we are extending our voices through this podcast, we also talked about how people have extended their voices through time.
Yes, through telecommunications. We looked at the history in some depth, from those talking drums to cell phones.
And to keep up with our voices being out there, we had to develop faster and faster ways of getting around.
Yep, we move around inside of cities for trade and between cities, ways to get around, ways to figure out where we are through mapping and GPS.
But this whole adventure, we kind of got hungry and we need to eat.
We always do.
We've looked at how meals have changed along the way and how they're continuing to change.
That's right, how meal delivery services are altering our concept of what a meal even is.
All of this required faster processing than even our little brains could handle.
Yes, which is not all that much.
No, but this is how we got computing, from Babbage to the laptop or cell phone that you're listening to this on.
That's right. And all those computers, including, Rachel, the ones we carry in our pockets that sometimes wiggle when things happen, all those computers created and processed a lot of data.
Especially data about your credit card fraud of
Yes.
buying Caterpillar food.
That we started this whole discussion with. Someone fraudulently buying Caterpillar food using my credit card number.
I got to hear more about that some other time.
That'll be in the extended, subscribe and get the extra. All those computers created and processed a lot of data, so we dug into analytics as a discipline. Where did it come from? How have we done it? How has the practice evolved over time?
Because data is what runs our lives at the end of the day. We had to be able to pay taxes from the get-go, write down recipes, figure out where we are. All of this is data.
Which led us, in our last episode, to a very specific technical innovation.
With a very cool name.
Apache Kafka. Now, if you are a technology developer or someone in the data ecosystem, you know what this is. If you're not, you might not see it, but this Kafka thing has been at the center of a revolution in the way software systems are built, a revolution that's unfolding right now.
And you could probably say that most of the apps, if you use a smartphone on a daily basis, wouldn't be possible without a technology like this.
Which gets us to today and this episode. We spent all this time trying to find the story in how all of these threads combine. Today, we're going to look at another technology, one that helps us find the story in the data in a different way than we're used to.
And this story begins, like so many other good stories, at LinkedIn.
Now, LinkedIn was a really cool idea. In the original days, it was a place to keep your resume and your Rolodex, if you even know what one of those is. But as Facebook and Twitter were happening, and to some degree taking over the world, really figuring out how to keep users coming back, how to be live, how to be things that are like updated all the time that you wanted to check. Suddenly, resume and Rolodex site didn't seem very cool.
We were trying to fight for eyeballs, right?
Yeah, that was the thing. Let's ask Kishore Gopalakrishna. He's one of the co-creators of Apache Pinot. He worked at LinkedIn back then. Let's ask him about those days.
There are a couple of things that started happening in LinkedIn. I think if you go back to 2010, 2011 timeframe, LinkedIn was a resume site, if you will. People used to come to LinkedIn only when they changed their jobs. And one of the things that LinkedIn had in mind was, hey, this has to be more than just a resume site. We want to really provide a lot of value to the users. And that's really what started a lot of technology revolutions at LinkedIn. Right? And the first thing was when people were coming, the first thing that people were doing at LinkedIn was they were just looking at profiles. Just look at the recruiters, for example. They were looking at various different profiles and like, who should I reach out to?
Yeah. What's this person done for work in the past? What's their experience? You're just going to look at their profile. Yeah.
I think it was a very simple thing, and it's a natural thing that kind of happens in pretty much any social network. And then in LinkedIn being a professional network, that used to happen a lot more. Right? And it was pretty amazing. So what we used to do with the data internally, you just simply look at whose profile and you come up with insights. What that allows you to do is also come up with what kind of products do we need to invest in within LinkedIn.
They're coming up with those insights the old-fashioned way. They were collecting all the data, which in this case is who viewed what profile, so like who's clicking on who, and they collected all that in a data lake. And we've talked about that idea in the last few episodes. Just big pile of data, stick it somewhere in this big giant collection of storage, and then run jobs on it overnight to create reports that internal managers could look at. And those people in this case were product managers, the people trying to decide what features to build next. That sounds great, right?
Yeah, totally.
Kishore's got more.
That's how it started, because this was really an internal tool to begin with, because we wanted to just see like where is the activity happening in the world, right? Is it in India? Is it in US? Is it in Brazil? Like, it was really a product manager internally looking at it and gathering insights. So this is even before who viewed my profile. So it's funny sometimes to just go back and look at how products emerge and how they actually get created. So this was just product managers looking at it and seeing, like, hey, how are we doing in each country and how are we growing? So this was just an internal dashboard, and Pinot didn't even exist at that time. And you didn't even need like real-time insights for this. You would just go back the next day and then look at it, or at the end of the week.
This doesn't seem to be the same fast pace of change.
No, it seems kind of old-timey.
Right.
Like next week.
Next week? That's not how data products work anymore.
Yeah, an internal product manager looking at a report and getting an idea for a new feature is very cool. He makes a good point. Like,
very cool.
They were just kind of looking at stuff and, they weren't thinking of making anything new, but there it was. Still, that new feature, that's weeks at the earliest.
Right.
This is programmers have to go do things.
Right. Software development is not instantaneous.
It's trust me.
As much as ChatGPT may make us think that it is.
That's right. But, if you're LinkedIn at this point, you want it to be more interesting.
Right. You're competing for time and engagement. And how do you do that on a social media site that's business focused?
Yeah, Facebook and Twitter taking over the world at this point with their super immediate instant update, relentlessly fast-paced kind of life, and LinkedIn wanted to get in on that and honestly get more people connected and coming back more often. And the way this stuff is unfolding at LinkedIn, it might seem like we're giving this an awful lot of time. This is really an important story. Let's get Kishore to tell us a little bit more.
It's about how many people are connected and how strongly they're connected. So the strength of the network is really how strong the connection is between two people. So I think that's one of the things that LinkedIn wanted to establish. And if people just come in, sign up, and then just go away, that's not really a strong social network. And that's where it all started. What can we do to our members at LinkedIn? What can we give them more than what they're actually getting? And that started off with just simply providing insights on their own data. Right? And then let's say Tim, you're very popular. A lot of people are like looking at you and then looking at your profile, and it just feels good for you to know, like, hey, I'm popular in XYZ. So there are a lot of people and we were actually surprised by this, because when we started, this is the product that I'm talking about, is like the Who Viewed My Profile product, right? Which became very, very popular. And I don't think anyone, even within LinkedIn, expected that to happen. And we were genuinely excited, and we were all very, very surprised at the success of this project. And this is where it kind of started seeding that need for real-time analytics at LinkedIn.
And Tim, out of everybody, you should know what it feels like to be popular on LinkedIn.
I do all right. It feels great.
But yeah, I really like the Who Viewed My Profile. I wish I had that on other social media platforms. So it did, for me, make LinkedIn a lot stickier.
Exactly. And then afterward, LinkedIn developed a feed like Facebook had at that point, and that was kind of intrinsic to the way Twitter was. Kishore doesn't talk about this, but it happened to be powered by the same technology. That is itself this kind of real-time analytics product getting fed to you.
I think it's worth pointing out here that a lot of things that we take for granted on apps that we use, social media, are hard IT problems. They're hard computer science problems that had to be fixed and had to be innovated around.
Yes, and they seem easy after they're done, but they're not easy at the time.
Another thing you might take for granted when you're using a social media platform is actually how it ends up getting paid for. But the systems that had to serve these ads had to make very big decisions very quickly on an absolute gobsmacked amount of data.
Yeah. So in other words, this wasn't the first real-time analytics application in the world. We've been serving ads for 10, 15 years.
But the web page was loading, and then part of that web page says, hey, ad network, there should be an ad here. And the ad network knows a little bit about you and just from the request your browser is making to the network. So it takes all these little few things that it knows about you, maybe a little information from your browsing history.
A little of this, a little of that.
A little, maybe Alexa requests or things that you say to your iPhone. Potentially activity on other sites, the kind of content on the page with an ad, and so on.
That's a lot of stuff that you're having to make a computation about very quickly.
Right. And that data has to be joined together, too. That's the technical term, but it needs to figure out all the different things about you over a number of different types of properties in a number of different formats.
Yeah, and this is just to say real-time analytics queries, analytics computations, they'd been around since before these events Kishore is talking about. But those were all pretty specialized, one-off solutions. People had to build those themselves. It was a bunch of infrastructure they had to build, which is basically what LinkedIn is about to do here. The difference being that what they build kind of becomes a product that sticks around.
Right. And they started by adapting an existing technology to use for this new real-time analytics use case. And it might not have been brand new to this world, but it was pretty rare.
After a short break, we'll look at how LinkedIn solved this problem with the tools they had at hand.
I'm Rachel Pedreschi.
I'm Tim Berglund.
This is Keyboard and Quill. We're going to keep going with our show on Apache Pinot with LinkedIn's first pass at solving the who viewed my profile problem.
Let's hear from Kishore on the first pass they took at this problem.
There were a lot of other databases that were available, like Elasticsearch and things like that, that really provided the analytics solution, but they couldn't scale. I mean, that's kind of what we used in the first place before we built Apache Pinot, but it's a difference between 1,000 nodes of Elasticsearch versus 75 nodes of Pinot. And the number of queries, I think I always had this. In LinkedIn today, we run like 250,000 queries per second just at LinkedIn. When I say these numbers, people don't believe that like it's possible in analytics world because most people think analytics is for analysts. And that has completely changed.
He's foreshadowing some things there. But Rachel, Elasticsearch, he mentions that if somebody's not familiar with Elasticsearch, that's a product LinkedIn was using at the time and it's still very popular, useful today.
And you actually probably use it a lot more than you think you do. Anytime you do any type of search on any type of website, you're probably using Elasticsearch.
Yes. It's all over the place. And search and analytics, those are two different kinds of things you do with data.
Very different from our perspective.
From everybody else's perspective,
yeah,
it kind of
so
seems
much.
pretty similar. Yeah. Under the covers, interesting insight, though, here. I think that's worth thinking about a little bit. With technology tools, sometimes you have things that are direct competitors for one another, right? Like before our time in the mainframe days, you could buy one from IBM or Hitachi or Unisys or Honeywell. And, you pick one, you're not picking the other. They're direct competitors.
Right.
Sometimes one choice doesn't directly compete with another, though, and you get this weird blending of one application into another. Like if you don't have a chisel, but you do have a flathead screwdriver, you could kind of do a little bit of chiseling with the screwdriver, right? Or you could use, worst example, a chisel to open a paint can.
Or you could use a butter knife like I always get in trouble for.
As I think you should. The paint can's going to get open, it might get the job done, but it's not really going to do it well.
I don't know. My butter knife works fine.
You think so?
Yeah, my husband doesn't think so.
Let the record show Rachel's husband is a general contractor, definitely has opinions about tools and their correct use.
And not butter knives.
And they are not butter knives. So this is kind of happening here. You got this one thing that's super useful, you use it all the time, you're using it for this application that it can be used for, but it didn't really work out well, and so they built another solution.
As you do, as you are just a genius of a person who say, you know what I'm going to do? invented a completely new database.
Exactly. And it's funny. Again, I didn't explicitly ask Kishore about this part of the story. I've talked to him about it at other times. He didn't want to do that. He's a reasonable person. Okay. He makes good choices.
Good
in
life
his
choices, really?
Generally seems like, kind of has a life that's well managed, just average sort of guy.
Doesn't just randomly decide to build, huge enterprise data systems.
This is, well managed, basically peaceful life is not consistent with, hey, let me write a new database. Those don't normally go together, and they did for him. He didn't want to do it. He looked at the problem and he said, terrible idea. Let's not do that.
Yet here we are.
So let's look at how this went. They built this new kind of data infrastructure, this new kind of database, a big bet, a lot of work, terrible process. How'd it go?
It was an immensely successful thing for us at LinkedIn. Lots of people. And I think before we started Apache Pinot, we had, around 1,000 people looking at it every second. That was how popular it was. And I think none of us expected that. And that's what led to this next wave, which is it's the requirement of insights from an insights point of view is so different for external users versus internal users, right? I think the real-time aspects become so much more important for consumers than internal people within the organization. There are cases where it's very important even within the organizations as well. But if you look at the traditional analytics, which is purely for analysts, that's where real-time is not that important. It's totally fine to get the insights after a day, after 2 days and things like that. But as the world is continuously changing right now, there are so many different things that led to this revolution of, hey, I need insights right now.
So this who viewed my profile thing was successful and helped them realize that for some kinds of data, you actually need to know what's going on right now. It's actually really important to know it now, not tomorrow, not an hour from now, maybe not even a minute from now, but actually now.
Actually, I think people probably realize that data at their fingertips is much more valuable than data that's a week old or even 15 minutes old.
Yeah, depending on the kind of data.
Especially if you have a toddler in the house.
Yes. Especially if you're talking about food delivery.
Ooh,
which
yes.
is actually where this went next. Because if you think about peak meal times, they're rapidly changing circumstances. Peak demand that maybe is in response to some other event that's not even a predictable thing, like 6 o'clock, And this Pinot thing, this new database, started life at LinkedIn, but it didn't stay there. The next folks who adopted it were people working on that meal delivery problem, people at Uber Eats.
You could say that Pinot started moving in real time to different use cases.
It did, eventually.
The behavior of the consumers is changing so much. And everyone wants to make those decisions and they want to make those decisions right. I think I always give this example of Uber Eats. Before something like Uber Eats, when you go to Uber Eats, you see a restaurant, that little tiny thing which says like how long it takes to serve that order. Now, go back a few decades and how would you do that? You would just call up every restaurant. You would ask them like, hey, how long do you take to serve this order? And you would call up probably 3 or 4. And then the worst thing is like the time that they say, let's say 30 minutes, it's probably like an hour or 2. And you have no idea what the real time is. And the reality is even the person answering that question doesn't know what it is. So now, 1, this data is stale. 2, this data is completely inaccurate, right? And it's very hard to make decisions based on that data that is both wrong and and I think that's where the behavior of the consumers are changing. They want this control of the decision that they're making. So right now they have these options that, okay, I have these 3 favorite restaurants, but I have the one that serves me the fastest, so I'm going to select that.
Shortest time to French fries. I mean, that's what we want.
I mean, that should be a metric.
I'm sure it is for someone. So why is this happening now? Now, we just kind of interrupted Kishore here. I want to get back to him. He's bringing together 2 separate threads. I didn't coach him on this.
Yeah, right, Tim.
No, he is. Trust me. Let's hear what he says.
The rise of smartphones and then being able to access the network so that you can actually query. Also, there is a lot of technology improvement that made this possible. Right? You have huge improvement in the network and huge improvement in the storage because Kafka was possible. You could store tons and tons of data and the cost of logging an event could be drastically reduced from what it was before. And now with the rise of SSDs and the different technology, like what we did in Apache Pinot, you could reduce the cost per query drastically. And that was super important for us to get it right, because I think I say this in other places, when we got 1,000 queries per second, we almost needed 1,000 nodes to serve this.
He says smartphones are a factor, and smartphones rely on a particular state of the development of telecommunications and computing. We've traced these threads in this show. These are some of the things we've talked about. And Uber Eats, I mean, we had that whole show on meals and meal delivery, thinking about this thread as it's coming together. He mentioned SSDs. Now, Rachel, you and I are old enough. We've been PC users for a while. Remember before everything was a laptop, you had your desktop tower, and
I do.
you could hear it, right? It
We had little discs spinning.
And to me, it was comforting. It was like, it's the computer. Computer's doing, it's okay. It's working.
Now we know what Tim's ASMR queries look like.
Yes, old style hard disk noises. And you just knew it would be back with you soon. It's busy doing something. And now not quite like that. With your laptop, maybe you can hear the fans kick in. Recent MacBook models can't even really hear the fans very much. They just kind of sit there.
No, not at all.
Yeah, which is great. But point being, the disk that used to be in your computer was made of these very flat, smooth metal disks coated with an oxide of iron.
Let's point out that those disks can only spin so fast. I mean, comes into the laws of physics here. You could only produce data at a certain rate with spinning disks.
Yeah, I mean, you spin as fast as you economically could in the little package and to the degree of flatness that you could economically engineer.
Until you create a little sonic boom because you're going too fast.
You don't want that. Yeah. So there were all kinds of limitations there, and those still exist in the world. You've got data in the cloud, I guarantee, that's on disks like that. But for the most part, the disk in your laptop, on a modern laptop, and the kind of storage that Pinot is expecting to run on is now just a bunch of integrated circuits. It's all just completely electronic with no mechanical parts at all. So if you don't know what an SSD is, Kishore mentioned SSDs, you know now. Anyway, so smartphones enter the chat, enabled by telecom. Storage gets a lot cheaper. Storage gets faster. These things are not strictly related. It's not like one of them causes the other, but the threads come together to make new things possible.
So these smartphones that you were using in your personal life, if you were already used to using Uber Eats to order your French fries, you might want to start applying that to your work as well.
Yeah, the same kinds of interactions. Jay talked about this in our last episode on Kafka. The native web businesses where it's always just been one website, always been an app. It's this great integrated, fast, smooth experience, largely. And legacy businesses trying to become digital weren't always that great. And so now there's increased expectations, even from people looking at analytics inside of a company.
One of the things that has changed is now analytics is for everyone. Everyone needs that, and everyone wants to make decisions based on data.
I think that's an excellent insight. It's that everyone has become a decision maker.
Precisely. It's everyone. It is funny how these things have changed in the last decade or two. From anywhere from kids to my mom and to anyone, they all look at this data right now and to make their decisions. And there are still a lot of places where it's not available, right? I always think about the appointment at a doctor's place, right? They always tell you come at 3 o'clock and you go there and you sit until 4 o'clock. How cool it would be if I can just know this is what is happening there. This is you're running behind schedule and you don't have to come and sit there and be in that place taking all the germs in. Yes. So it would have been much nicer if I could just get in when the timing is right.
Again, we see all of these historical threads culminating now in the reality that so much of our lives, commercial and social, are mediated digitally. And the data that's important to us isn't just a bunch of stuff about shipments and sales and customer service interactions like a 90s company manager might have cared about.
Yeah, it's our social networks and things we've bought and things we might want to buy and who we date and what we eat and how we talk to loved ones. All of these interactions are now the data inside these SaaS applications.
And when you use those applications, even your actions with the app, with the website, those things become data too. And it's fundamentally real-time data.
And people get really scared or surprised when I say like any page you click on LinkedIn, you actually emit 1,000 events. That's the amount of information that you can actually collect. You can just think of right from what's the time it take to load the page to like load every widget in the page. You can now continue to monitor this and make sure that the experience that you have as a consumer is really good, right? Because if the page doesn't load, you're moving to another app. I think both the companies win because they're able to provide really good customer service. And it's also good for the consumers because now they're using this information to make their lives better.
After a short break, we'll hear from Gwen Shapira on this same trend. But first, let's replenish our studio snack budget.
At the tone, please record your message.
Hi, this is Anya from Milpitas, California. Keyboard and Quill is made possible by StarTree, host of the Real-Time Analytics Summit, an annual conference that brings together professionals in the data space to discuss harnessing actionable insights from real-time data. Join us to learn, teach, connect, and have an amazing time with the best community in the user-facing real-time analytics world.
Register now at rtasummit.com.
I'm Rachel Pedreschi.
I'm Tim Berglund.
This is Keyboard and Quill.
Now, I need to bring Gwen Shapira back from our previous episode. She talked about this when we were talking about Kafka, and I just want to listen to her again on this point. I think it's really important.
Your application is on the internet, users are coming in, you suddenly have a lot more detailed data about your user behaviors than you ever had when you shipped a CD and asked them to install it, or even offered a download and asked them to install it. Suddenly you had extremely detailed behavior about user behavior. At that time, social networks became a thing. If you think about a lot of the big data technologies, Hadoop and so on, obviously LinkedIn, but also Facebook, Twitter, all those had massive amounts of data and ideas on how to monetize this data. So all this caused data to become a lot more valuable and something that a lot of businesses looked into.
Now that software, or at least the data behind the software, is all online, in the cloud. Remember we talked about this cloud idea a few episodes ago? So everyone who uses that data becomes a decision maker.
Yeah, remember, again, back in the 90s, this was all business data. And if you worked as a decision maker in a business like that, it mattered. But it was orders, inventory, shipments,
Blah, 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 blah.
You had to be one of those people to care. And so the data tools we had back then catered to those decision makers.
And even now as consumers, we're decision makers too. And for the analytics to work for us, we can't have lumbering data warehouses working overnight. Or even data lakes of 15 years ago that take a minute or so to answer a question. You're not going to wait for a minute for an app on your phone to respond. You need it to be more or less instant.
Yes, you do. Now, we started this series as non-historians, exploring the idea that life is much faster paced than it used to be. Now, whatever you think of that idea, you can be sure that you're not going to wait 30 seconds for your screen to refresh when you tap on a button on your phone.
And the crazy thing is that this is even spilling back over into internal decision makers too. Plenty of online businesses move too fast for next day or next hour or even 10 minutes ago data. Kishore talks about this too.
You had these executives or the business leaders within the company who cared about, let's say, revenue. And what used to happen is that was the only thing that was tracked, or few things along with the revenue metrics. But when they ask questions like, hey, my revenue is dropping, or it's most of the time that question they'll ask, no one will ask if the revenue is increasing.
Yeah, they just celebrate.
But when they ask such questions, most people didn't really have a good answer, right? And they had to, because they had to make some educated guesses. And that's one of the other things that has changed here is now you can track all the second order metrics that actually lead for the revenue to increase. If you look at LinkedIn revenue, that's like kind of a byproduct of everything else now, right? And I think that's becoming more and more apparent in all organizations, and they're realizing that. Yes, you need to track revenue because that's what matters in the end, but you also need to track all the things that leading to that, including how many people are visiting LinkedIn, what is the engagement time, what is the session time. What that allows you to do now is like you can track all these things. Sometimes you don't even know, hey, this is the metric that's actually impacting the revenue. There are a lot of correlations between across different metrics. But because of the various advancements that have happened in the technology, you can now do this.
Way back when, a few weeks ago, when we were talking about industrialization, we talked about how machines reduced the overall unit cost. The unit cost of a word of print went down when printing machines were developed, and then again when they became steam-powered, and then even more so when they became electronic. So funny things happen when the unit cost of things goes down by 100x, 1,000x, 1,000,000x.
My favorite example of this is the industrialization of spinning thread, like the kind of thread you use to make clothing. You know, it used to be really expensive, labor intensive. You had mostly women sitting around spinning fibers on spinning wheels. into thread, and you just couldn't make all that much. So
Took a long time. This was not the era of fast fashion.
it was not. That just wouldn't have made any sense. And you didn't use textiles for very much. Now it seems like I can't get a USB charging cord that isn't wrapped in a textile of some kind. I prefer just the plastic ones, but it's just how it goes. Gets to be 10,000, 100,000, a million times cheaper. You find new things to do with it.
So back at LinkedIn, they saw they had built a system that had reduced the cost for a query, or the cost to answer a single question you asked of the data, by several orders of magnitude.
That's kind of why Kafka was so important for us to get to Pinot, because Kafka had to first solve the problem of tracking, because without that you couldn't solve the next problem, right? And which is really reduce the cost per query. So that's how I always see the analogy as with Kafka and Pinot is Kafka reduced the cost per logging an event, and then Pinot is drastically reduced in cost per query, so that you can ask more questions, you can get more insights. And I think one of the things there is also decision making is not just asking one query. It's an iterative process. You ask a question, you get an answer, and you based on the answer, you ask another question, and it's kind of an iterative process.
So when the cost of something goes down 1,000 times, we don't do 1,000 times more of it.
Usually not.
Right. We find different ways to use it that would have been inconceivable before, because it was just way too expensive. So here's what Kishore saw.
That's important because each iteration cannot take a long time. So it's not just fresh, it's also the latency matters. So I think that's one of the things that a lot of companies are realizing right now, which is they think they don't have the need, but it's a chicken and egg problem, because they're not addressing these other needs of the product, which is it has to be fresh and it has to be fast. And that's when you will have the third problem, which is the scale. And many companies I talk to is oh, we don't need real time. We don't need low latency because we tried this product. It didn't really work. And I was is the product fast? Is the product fresh? No, but no one is asking. I was no consumer is going to come and ask right now. You got to give them this. And that's when you see the changes. And no one asked us to come and build a who viewed my profile page at LinkedIn. No one asked it to be fast. No one asked it to be fresh. And we did all these things. And that's what led to 1,000 people. And now today there are 5 to 10,000 people looking at that page. It's that give it before they ask mindset. That's what leads to winners in this market. And most of the leaders, that's leading organizations, that's what they do. They do things before the customer asks for it. And then it becomes their competitive advantage. Then everyone catches up. Sometimes I still can't believe that a restaurant owner is having real-time analytics, right? And you look at people within an organization, they may not have it, but you are now giving this to a restaurant owner. And Uber Eats started with this, and everyone else now is doing it. You think of DoorDash, you think of Cloud Kitchens, you think of Zomato, you think of every Grab, you think of Just Eat. Every delivery organization is forced to do it because it's become the new bar. That's customers are setting expectation.
Can I sum this up in my own words, Tim?
Yes.
I think what he's saying is data, like bread, is best when it's fast and fresh.
Couldn't have put it better myself.
If we had just jumped into the topic of real-time analytics with no context of previous episodes,
Anything.
Right, it could be a little confusing. And you might not know why it matters. How does it impact your life? What is important about it? What are the limiting factors keeping it from happening earlier?
Yeah, like Kishore suggested, you don't always know you need a new thing.
Right, yeah, I think that's important.
You got the famous Henry Ford, if I'd asked people what they wanted, they would have asked for a faster horse. Sometimes you want a thing and you don't know how to do it, right? I would love there to be warp drive. We don't know how.
And I want transporter technology.
Yeah, I just don't know how to do that, yeah. When there's a new thing, you usually have to have these many threads come together to make the new idea conceivable, so anybody would even think of it, and then possible to do.
Or somebody who comes up with an idea and then somebody else monetizes it later. These have been the themes.
We've seen these things over and over again.
So we're ending here on the topic of Apache Pinot, the story of how it got here. The whole history of data has been, to one degree or another, a series of attempts to find ways to find the story in data.
And that is what Pinot does. That's the whole discipline of analytics, is to find the story in the data. And Pinot is a technology that itself finds stories in real time.
And that's the pace that is nearly every aspect of our day-to-day lives.
Absolutely, as we've said over and over again. It's not fashionable anymore to take data and go put it someplace over there where it'll sit like water in a lake until we need to go ask it questions, right? We want to act on things right away. Data has become a real-time thing.
And so much of our life takes place through data, even in real time. Food, transportation, dating, communication with loved ones. All of that data tells a story. And this is not a story that belongs to high-status decision makers inside a company. It belongs to us.
Over these 13 episodes, we've traced the story of a technology which itself helps us find our own story. And, real-time analytics, if we just come to you with that might not have sounded too exciting right off the bat. But remember those things Rachel was talking about a little bit ago?
Like how we eat.
Services like Uber Eats, Just Eat, DoorDash, cloud kitchens all over the planet.
And how we move around.
Your good old Uber app.
Even the ways that we communicate.
Can't live without Slack, WebEx.
How we navigate our careers.
We've heard about LinkedIn a lot in this episode.
Even how we get our entertainment.
Services like Roku.
And how we pay for things that we need in daily life.
Indispensable payment infrastructure like Stripe.
So this weaves a fabric of the different stories that have existed throughout history that brings us to this particular moment in time.
And that's the story of our increasingly digital lives, a story which real-time analytics helps us find. And that is a very important story indeed. I'm Tim Berglund.
I'm Rachel Pedreschi.
This has been Keyboard and Quill. Many thanks to Kishore Gopalakrishna, co-founder and CEO of StarTree, Jay Krebs, co-founder and CEO of Confluent, and Gwen Shapira, co-founder of Nile. You can find links to their work in the show notes.
Our show is produced by Peter Furia, Noelle Gallagher, and Tim Berglund. It was written by Tim Berglund
and Rachel Pedreschi. It was edited by Noelle Gallagher, David Fine, and Peter Furia. And our amazing original music and sound design were created by Jeff Kite of The Voids.
Keyboard and Quill is made possible by StarTree, hosts of the Real-Time Analytics Summit. Register now at rtasummit.com.
You can subscribe to Keyboard and Quill for free wherever you listen to podcasts, including Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. Please leave us a comment and a rating if you have a minute. And if you're a data professional, you should check out the Real-Time Analytics podcast, which we launched in early 2023. New episodes every Monday, link in the show notes. See you next time.